Hello, everybody. Chris Martinson here, and today we're going to be talking about finance and economics as part of Finance U. Remember, anything that you see in this video and all resources available at our websites or affiliated websites are not intended as or construed as financial advice. This is for educational purposes. Remember, if you have a financial decision, please consult a financial professional. We are not attorneys, we're not CPAs, we are not financial managers. As well, we do our best to be accurate, and everything we represent is as accurate as we know it to be. Now, let's turn to our program. So we haven't been investing in ourselves, and our leaders are busy funneling money over into failed adventures, across the world at this point in time. So I'm a little bearish on where that goes. I'm pretty sure, this being an election year, that this the climate crisis is just some sort of a grift, funneling money to various companies who are going to funnel that back into the campaign coffers, something like that. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Finance University. Back with Paul Kiker of Kiker Wealth Management. How you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing good, Chris. Nice to see you again.
Thanks. Yeah. All right. Likewise. A couple bombshells I woke up to today that I had to process because I didn't see them yesterday. Maybe you did. But let's start here because I know there's big implications for people, particularly people with portfolios. It's got to be this, which is Team Biden. It's not Biden. We all know Biden doesn't propose anything except maybe what he wants for breakfast. But beyond that, his team has decided that it would be a good idea to propose a whopping 44.6% capital gains tax bombshell. Maybe they're thinking, Paul, that, that it'll get whittled back, but that they would even propose that. Let me just put this in context. This is going to be the highest proposed tax rate for capital gains since the capital gains tax went into effect in 1922. And remember, they started it with it'll just be a little thing. We'll just take a little taste for now. That's all we want. Maybe even they told us it was temporary, but of course nothing is quite so permanent as a government temporary program. What do you make of this, and what kind of impacts could this have if it passed?
Well, I saw that last night right before I went to bed after being in the garden all day long, and I sat there and rolled around frustrated with it, but didn't take the time to dig any deeper. I think the implications for the market are going to be relatively substantial. I mean, just imagine at this point how many people are in a buy and hold, just sitting on that portfolio position, 44.6%. Versus your current tax rates on where they are. I would anticipate that would provide a substantial reason for people to sell their equities and then potentially go support the treasury market, because that much pent up capital gains in there, looking at 44.6%, depending upon how much time they give them, if that's what actually comes through, would drive a lot of selling in portfolios, which would, supply and demand, would theoretically drive the market down relatively substantially.
I could also see a shift, right? Putting it into tax advantaged accounts, maybe. So this would probably goose people saying, well, let me max out my 401ks. Let me throw stuff out there. But I hate having to try and figure out what I need to do today based on what the government might do tomorrow vis-a-vis taxes. It takes an already difficult situation, makes it that much harder.
Yeah, and what I don't understand is going from the current tax rates of where they are, capital gains rates, to 44.6%. I mean, where in the world did you get 44.6%? And if that's where you're starting your negotiations from, where are you hoping they're going to end up? I mean, maybe somebody in the team is actually waking up to all their, quote, fiscal responsible spending that they finally understand has been fiscally irresponsible, and that tax bill is going to come due sooner rather than later. One thing that concerns me about that, go ahead, Chris, if you had a thought.
Well, I'm just, I've been seeing a lot of TikTok videos lately of young people asking what seems to be a fair question, which is, they just print this money up anyway. Why are they taxing us at all? And you've seen the same lists I have, right? Like in 1913, the number of taxes you paid, there was two things on the list, and now it's everything from fishing licenses to, your permit fees for your cars and blah, blah, blah. There's 50 things that the government's going to hit you on. But at the same time, why not? Why not just, this is the MMT Princetonian Stephanie Kelton, just print it. Just print it. Just print it and spend it. Paul?
Well, to an extent, you mentioned the Stephanie Kelton and the MMT, modern monetary theory. I'm wondering if this is the attempt to introduce some type of modern monetary theory. Okay, we're just going to, keep fiscal stimulus high, monetary policy loose, because it is loose right now. The Fed doesn't seem to be really reining in the monetary liquidity out there. And hey, we're just going to tax those people and take it out of the market that way. Because isn't the argument behind MMT that, hey, if inflation gets running too high, we'll just raise taxes and pull the money out of the system until inflation comes back down? I wonder if that's what they're trying to do, is just raise taxes to the point that they take that purchasing power out of the economy.
All right. Everybody doesn't like taxes. I get it. And, if you want to live in a country with decent infrastructure, there's a case to be made for it. But let me back it up a bit. Let's have a conversation about taxes real quick. So this proposal, I think if you peel it back, what Team Biden is saying is it's a winning political strategy to soak the rich. Remember, I think AOC wore a dress that said tax the rich, and so this is the idea. We got to tax the rich. Now, let's back up. We have a wealth gap. It's extraordinary, but that's principally because the Federal Reserve prints money, and that benefits the people who hold the financial assets. And that is a separate concept from having capital gains, although there may be an overlap in those Venn diagrams, right? I would be, what if, I believe that there were some libertarians, or maybe it was Steve Forbes back in the day, who said, sure, have a capital gains tax, but the government has to penalize itself by backing out inflation, because that's not a capital gain. So I bought $100 worth of Coke stock and it goes to 200, but the cost of a house went from 100 to 200. There's no capital gain involved here.
That's a great
They should
proposal.
be penalized for their own perfidy. Yeah.
They should be, but they're not going to do that. They're not, unfortunately. So, that brings to mind also, and I don't want to change your thought process, but that also brings to mind the Trump tax cut sunset in 2025. So if they sunset, right, my concern is they're spending just so foolishly, fiscal irresponsibility. And this is the perfect opportunity for the Republicans to point at the Democrats and blame it on them, and the Democrats to point at the Republicans and blame it on them, and then high five each other behind the scenes that, hey, taxes go up. So for those individuals that are out there in the audience, there are a couple of things that you really need to consider. We're probably not going to know whether they're going to be able to get this can kicked down the road longer, renew them, or whatever. You don't want to wait to the last minute if you've got a large estate, okay? Because everybody's going to be trying to get to those estate planning attorneys at the last minute.
True.
So you want to get your structure in place, whether you implement it or not, because the exemption right now is somewhere between 12 and 13 million. I haven't memorized those numbers, but if they sunset, we go back to 6 million. Okay. So if you don't get that planning in process now, you're probably not going to be able to get in to see somebody at the last minute. Because one thing we've all discovered, in society now is if you're really good at what you do, you're busy and it takes a while to get in there. So, think about that. The second thing is, when we look at this proposal that's coming through, this further emboldens me to encourage people seriously look at considering doing some conversion over to a Roth IRA. If you're in a company with a 401k, especially if you're younger, or if you've got the large majority of your assets in a traditional 401k, you can contribute up to $30,000 if you're over the age of 50 this year into the Roth 401k. Now, you do not get a tax deduction for going into the Roth 401k, but that is tax-free money after 5 years and 59 and a half. There's a few restrictions in there, but it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. So, I believe we're in a situation now because of the government foolishness and spending that we have to diversify our income sources down the road. And it makes sense to seriously consider, don't let a year go by, especially this year and next year, without using up the rest of your tax bracket. If you're in a reasonable tax bracket, to convert some of that traditional IRA or 401k over to a Roth, because that'll give you some tax-free income down the road.
Good point. And Paul, let me just take a second here to let everybody know that because of our work on the Great Taking, and thank you so much for burrowing into that, we're going to be having a webinar, and you're going to be attending this as one of our experts. We have a webinar on June 15th to talk about how to avoid the legal machinery that's been set up, maybe that could cause people to maybe lose their assets. We're going to talk about it. We've brought in, we'll have 6 separate experts in there talking about what it is, what it isn't, what we know, but also 7 strategies people can take to not be the lowest hanging fruit on that tree. So again, that's June 15th. If you come to Peak Prosperity, you can get tickets for that. It's going to be very good. And it's part of this planning process you've been talking about.
Yes.
And people are going to have to really begin to plan. And unfortunately, that's the world we're in. I kind of wish we lived in that world where you could earn money, you put it in a coffee can out back, 100 years later, it's still worth exactly what it was when you put it out there. And then if you wanted to take risk and invest it and put it at play, then you would do that, but you would understand risk and return and reward and failure are kind of all are holding hands. But now, because of the world we're in, there's the great taking, which we've been talking about, which is the legal machinery to potentially just take what you have, which is just gross. But there's the lesser taking, which is the government raising taxes on things, failing to account for the inflation that's already not part of your actual legitimate capital gains. But you're forced. I feel bad, Paul, and I'm not sure I could do your job because I feel terrible for older people who are forced to play the game where they might lose.
Yeah.
And they have to, though. You have to because of inflation. I mean, who believes the government numbers on inflation these days, right? They're much worse than advertised. We know that.
No, and it's our insurance bill came due here recently, and I left it on the counter, and Holly doesn't. I pay the bills in the house, and that's just kind of my thing. And I left it sitting there, and I heard her squeal in the living room, and I was in the bedroom, and I come running in there, and she's like, I cannot believe our car insurance is this expensive. So we had a long conversation over it. She's like, I've seen it at the grocery store, but yeah, you're right. And that's the frustrating thing is, I've been 25 years in the area that I'm in right now. One of the most heartbreaking things that I see come in the door, and this is why it's so important when I meet somebody to run a plan, stress test them against inflation. And I'll tell you an interesting thought, just the cognitive dissonance out there, conversations I've had with other advisors that are friends of mine here recently. But the worst thing is somebody who's in their early 80s or mid 80s and they come in, they thought that CDs were going to be the answer for them back in the year 2000. They were earning 7%. Then they go down to 1%. They're terrified of the markets. They don't necessarily know who to trust. They've watched us sit here outside, volunteer in the community and everything over years. So they finally come in. And you have somebody that sits there when you explain to them, really, one, you've waited too long. Okay. You didn't prepare for this ahead of time. There's not much that I can do for you except for these strategies, or those that, okay, there's no conservative way to protect yourself against inflation. There's just not, right? I mean, even I-bonds are a great conservative way. You're limited to how many you can purchase per year, $10,000 per person, and they do compensate you a little bit better, but you're still relying upon the government game numbers to make themselves look better, the plastic faces that they put on to protect yourself against inflation. And then you've got people that are just literally terrified in trying to roll out just the effort, the hand holding and everything that goes in. And I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to do that. I think it's helped shape me to be able to communicate and help people walk this journey better than what I otherwise would have. But it's heartbreaking. This is not a situation that we should be in. But unfortunately, we have to play the game by the rules that are forced upon us. And we're going to roll up our sleeves and go to work and help people navigate that environment. But it's not right. It's not what we should do to our elderly. It's not what we should do to our children. There's so many things about today's society that's foolish.
Yeah. Speaking of which, off track, but related, Evie and I have gone to a set of meetings in town because we have a municipal utility company and, taking care of our lines, but there's a movement afoot to maybe go with our larger operator. So they both put their cases on the table, right? And watching this larger operator come in, you know what they led off with, Paul? They said, we're such a great company. We have this incredible diversity, equity, and inclusion program running. And we're all about decarbonizing, right? So I'm like, oh, hands up, right? And so I asked a question and I said, the world leader in decarbonizing is Germany. and they have a lot of solar and wind, and they now have the highest, most punishing electricity costs. And so the truth that we're learning now is that green energy might make us feel good, but it's not ready for prime time. It can't be the central load, and it's also very expensive. So is your proposal that we should all just chip in for something because it feels good? And where's the end to that, right? And they froze and they didn't quite know how to answer the question, right?
They weren't ready.
They literally they ducked. They're like, we're just the distribution company. We just buy what we have to buy. The state tells us who we can buy from. I'm like, great. What's your lobbying efforts to tell the state they're full of crap, right?
Yeah.
But the average age in that room, Paul, probably 70. Yeah. And I could just see the panic on people's faces because their utility bills now are 100% more than they were just 4 or 5 years ago. And they're just struggling. And so they just wanted to hear who's got some program of relief. And I'm like, there's no relief. Your utilities are going up. Your insurance is going up. Everything's just going up. Deal with it, and I feel terrible for these people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's heartbreaking and it shouldn't be. And, it's interesting. They went from a marketing pitch until you asked them a good question to blaming it on the other person. It sounds like, didn't they? It's like, no, I'm just the intermediate guy. I'm just delivering the message. But, that's the problem. Yeah. It's all this virtue signaling and, plastic face America and post what's best on social media where you don't really post, the bad things that happen in your life necessarily. I mean, I know that's human nature, but it's gone to such an extreme within the corporations now. We just need to bring back a love of the truth and put it out there, and to an extent, it's just pride. It's like they know so much more than we do. We're just minions that they have to lead into a direction, and they're missing the fact that there are incredibly wise people in the United States that may not have accumulated a lot of resources because of the situation that they're in, but they're some of the most brilliant and wise and, common sense people that you have that can add a tremendous amount of value to the future of our country.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of which, I don't know how this ties in with economic stuff, but let's just talk about it very quickly. Apparently, the Biden White House, and it's not Biden himself. We all know that he's not actually running the show there, but whoever is running the show there has decided that they want to activate this climate crisis now. And the way I understand it is that activates all sorts of emergency orders and powers that suddenly, get reactivated. They said it'll give him COVID-like powers. It's like what? Is that like getting a cold? Makes you sneeze a little? I don't know. But
they're going to force.
But no, what they meant was COVID lockdown-like powers, right? And I'm just so against this. We used to be a constitutional republic, and somehow we've slipped all the way to where a bunch of people just shrug and go, well, if the president's just going to make up rules, he'll just make up rules, and we have to follow them. It's a very haphazard way to go about things, and unfortunately, it doesn't involve the checks and balances and the political discussion. And I think this weighs in on things because what I want to alert people to is that the more we flail around with these feel-goody things that aren't battle-tested, run by people who just frankly don't know what they're doing, the more we face a real hit to our prosperity potentially. So I think everybody's got to kind of prep for that a little.
I believe so.
Get extra buffers in the system, save up some more, and don't save it all in one thing that can go away real quick.
Yeah. And there may come a day where you have to spend money sooner rather than later. And it doesn't harm an individual to imagine what an inflationary future would look like and mentally prepare themselves ahead. But I'll tell you what's interesting. So I've got a couple of friends that don't run risk managed strategies. We've known each other for 26, 27 years. They're in the investment business. They're people that are trustworthy that I really like. But we had an unbelievable conversation here over the past couple of days because I was explaining how we stress test, 3.5%, 5.5%, 7.5%, and in some cases 9.5% inflation for individuals. And they were absolutely flabbergasted by that. Seriously, Chris, they were like, why would you waste your time scaring people about what a higher potential inflation number would be? And I said, so we had the debate, which you've done such a great job educating everyone without going over all of that. All of the evidence points that that's where the highest risk is for the future. So the argument was, the only time that we had inflation like that was in the 1970s, and it was sustained for 10 years. And the market did so well from 1980 all the way to the year 2000 that they had more than enough growth in their assets to be able to offset that. Now, I do understand it if you're just paying attention to, you're looking at the graphs and historical returns in the market. But the problem is our industry's done such a good job of pulling out what, an American Funds Mountain chart, for example, that goes back and shows Investment Company of America from 1968 and says, oh, if you'd have just stayed the course, this would have been great. That was a period of time where the market was undervalued to the point that it made sense, right? Because interest rates were so high, not that many people were starving to get into the stock market. Valuations were low. You had the baby boomers coming through with this massive wind in the sails of the economy. Then you had globalization that took place in the 1990s, and now we've become this completely financialized economy, right? In the 70s, we were a manufacturing powerhouse. I mean, I know in our area here, there's still old buildings that have been converted into apartments and things of that nature that employed large parts of our population because in the 70s, there was a lot of manufacturing in the U.S. But what I was amazed at is these individuals, are intelligent in what they're looking out for their clients, and they're trustworthy individuals, but there's some cognitive dissonance now because they've become so used to saying, yeah, but they won't even let their minds entertain something that's out there. So they're not going to have their clients prepared for it, and they're not going to be prepared for it themselves if this inflation comes through, because we've got the backdrop now, right? Like, we don't manufacture that much in the U.S. I know the dollar's strong right now, and Brett Johnson has the dollar milkshake theory, which is a fancy name, but his argument seems to have been right, dollar strengthening in the short run. But if we lose our global reserve status, we don't manufacture that much. If it has to be imported, whether it's Mexico or somewhere else, that's highly inflationary for our citizenry. But that just tells you the mindset that's out there. Most of Wall Street's like, yeah, but that can't happen. This is just temporary. It's transitory. And I'm really having a hard time looking over the next 10 years and understanding, okay, how does this inflation go away with the situation that we're in right now? And if the inflation doesn't go away, how do tax rates not go up relatively dramatically, right? And if you've got $1 million in an IRA and you're taking $50,000 a year out of it and tax rates double, well, guess what? Your income gets cut in half. So there's just a lot of risks out there that people are not paying attention to right now.
Well, I agree. And this is one of my favorite subjects, because it's what's different in this picture, right? So in the 70s, people go, oh, well, we had high inflation in the 70s and it moderated. That's been the long-term bet, is to say things will moderate, right? But at the same time, what's different? Well, we had a fraction of the debt on a per GDP basis, right? Debt's a millstone on your neck on these things. Back then, oil shortages and oil expense was a political decision, right? OPEC had political power. I'm watching OPEC like crazy, and there's a few OPEC members I think have a little latitude, but it's starting to shape up that maybe they don't have as much as they used to, not as much spare capacity. I think there's a strong thesis to be made for huge shortages in a variety of commodities out there because we just didn't invest for whatever, we just didn't need to, right? We didn't invest in copper mines, oil, offshore oil in particular, on and on, right? Silver, I just put a big silver investment thesis out for my subscribers, Paul, maybe you saw that. But it's just fundamental stuff, right? You add up, like, how much do we have and how much are we using? And you see this huge disconnect, and the market's just asleep on this stuff right now. And it won't be forever, I don't believe, but or maybe I'm the one that's asleep in this story, but that's always how I've done best, Paul, is I identify something that's really out of whack, and then I'm patient. Mm-hmm. That's been my strategy so far. But I don't think we could use the 70s as to say, let's just map that into today because, things are the same. They're just really not,
No.
in so many ways.
They're not in so many ways. Hey, and your piece on silver was wonderful. So Holly was listening to it, and I had been listening to it at the same time. I was out back. I wrapped up about 10 minutes before her and walked through the house, and she said, sit down, we need to talk. I said, yes, ma'am. And because, Holly's not like that, just so the audience knows out there. I like to pick at her. She's a good woman. But she sat me down, she looked at me, she said, now, I want to know how much silver we have and why we shouldn't buy any more. And I said, I thought you didn't care about this markets and portfolio stuff. She said, no, but that made a lot of sense to me. And she says, I'm not worried about the next 6 months. I'm worried about the next 5 to 7 years. So
Mm-hmm.
not a recommendation, just sharing a conversation that we had. But I do, you laid the found, and that's what you want to do when you invest from a long-term standpoint. Unfortunately, in our markets now, when they're stretched to the extreme, a risk managed approach can be a lifesaver because you have to assume that this time is not different. We have no clue when this thing ends, right? But it's kind of like driving a car 40,000 miles without changing the oil. It might make it another 20,000 miles, or it might seize up here in a few minutes. So the markets have reached the point of max efficiency and max financialization. This is a game that
Mm-hmm.
might be kicked down the road a little bit longer.
Yep.
The cynical part of me is like, hey, so does Biden want the climate emergency thing so he can juice money into the markets to keep them up into the election just in case they start rolling over in the summer? Is it as simple as that? I know that's a little cynical, but the reality is when you look at the commodities and international markets, and so these are categories that are, the fundamentals are so attractive that it makes sense to take something like that and set it on the shelf and say, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to look at it for 5 or 6 years, right? And you'll know when the prices take off, it'll draw your attention. But there are investments out there. They're not the popular ones. They're not the popular kids that all the fund managers are chasing. They don't sell easy, right? Back in 2012, when gold was kind of rolling over from our long-term sales signal, and I was talking, we had started taking, I have to be careful because you guys share a good thing and a bad thing, but we were recommending that people reduce their holdings in gold. I mean, I could have, if I'd have been promoting it, I could have had a line down the street of people coming in to get it. You run an ad for somebody to buy silver right now and they yawn. They don't even look at it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even pay any. The U.S. investors are selling
Yeah.
gold with a massive breakout. So anyway, that piece was phenomenal. For those of you out there that have not listened to it, you need to go listen to his presentation on silver. It was incredible.
Well, thanks, Paul. Yeah, that's what I do. I like analyzing things. I want, you know what? It's more than that. I want things to make sense. Let's make fundamentals great again because it's been all
Mm-hmm.
momentum and what's the Fed going to do and things that I consider to be not foundational, right? And we've made some mistakes about that in this country, right?
Mm-hmm.
If anybody who's ever been on any of the Northeast corridor looking at our infrastructure, I mean, you just, you double cross yourself and hold your breath as you go over bridges, hoping that they stay up for the whole trip, and if you get on Amtrak and you ride down the metro corridor, right, it's just like, you're just like going like this, and your computer will slide off your little plastic table, whereas you could go 4 times that speed in Europe and have a wine glass and you barely even see any ripples coming off the edge of that thing. It's just very sad where we are. So we haven't been investing in ourselves, and our leaders are busy funneling money over into failed adventures, across the world at this point in time. So I'm a little bearish on where that goes. I'm pretty sure this being an election year that this the climate crisis is just some sort of a grift, funneling money to various companies who are going to like funnel that back into the campaign coffers, something like that. That's how jaded I am, right? Not a political
Yeah.
statement. It's just how Washington, D.C. works, in general. But given that, I do think we have to get ready for higher inflation because I can't see anything out of this besides more printing.
And at some point, we're to the point now that the U.S. dollar has been strong relative to other currencies in spite of, and there's a problem with that too, right? Because most of the international currencies are tied to the dollar. So if the dollar goes up or down, that's going to follow with them. But again, you've got a situation here recently where there are different things that are happening. Okay. You've got the Japanese yen having a big breakdown with talk of intervention over there. How are they going to deal with that? Are they going to do it by raising rates? That's going to mess with the yen carry trade potentially. If they don't, that's going to supercharge the yen carry trade. But you've got gold breaking out with a strong dollar environment with yields that are higher. This is not the environment where gold breaks out like that. And relative to other currencies, it's been breaking out across the scene. So it's telling us something. And these are all like blood markers when you go to your doctor, they run your blood work. a good doctor is going to look at all the details and expound beyond, and they're going to look, okay, is there anything in here that's throwing up some yellow and red flags? And we're starting to see more and more of those in the markets right now. Now, we've had a little bit of a correction, not really a correction. We've had a little bit of a pullback after a pretty massive run. The question is that the end of the euphoria and we're in a topping process? I still believe we're in a topping process. And just because it may take another year does not mean that we're not in that topping process. Doesn't mean that we can't go to new highs. But this is the question where you're watching, okay, you're seeing a few things break around the edges. It's kind of like birth pains. And then all of a sudden they go away for a little bit, but now you have more coming back. So each time, I think it was around late last year, you were talking about creaking and popping and a couple of,
Yep.
So we've got more things that are creaking and popping around the edges as you have these little pullbacks. So, we're closer to the end than we are another major bull run. We just don't know exactly when this thing is going to be over.
Yeah. Hey, you want to know what I think it's going to look like? I think we got a clue from my favorite place in the world, Zimbabwe. I have a collection of the Zimbabwe dollars, the famous ones, right?
Yes.
$100 trillion notes, right? And all of that. What's fascinating to me is those are 1998. I have a 1996 Zimbabwe $20 note, which in this 20 Zimbabwe dollars, that it had value. So in 2 years, it went from a $20 thing having value to a $100 trillion note. Anyway, Zimbabwe's got its act together a little bit. Have you seen this? They've gone to these ZIGs, Zimbabwe gold. So they've backed some of their they've backed their currency. These ZIGs are actually backed by gold in their treasury.
It's in my to-do list to read for the weekend. So I was fascinated by that. Now, are they?
Well, I'm going to show you. Let's just look at this one thing that's super fascinating about this. Oh shoot, where did that go? All right, talk about it for a second. I have to find this because this is fascinating. I know right where to get it. The impact that had on their stock market is extraordinary.
That's what it was. I saw that chart.
Did you see that?
Yeah, 99. That's the reason I set it aside for the weekend. I'm like, okay, so why did the market go down 99% when they introduced a gold-backed currency? I still don't exactly understand why that happened. That's why I wanted to study it and read it. So,
it's a heck of a chart.
It is and there was no warning to that. It just happened, right?
Yeah. There it is. So there's your the benchmark index has fallen, they say, since the introduction of the ZIG. I would call that a fall. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fall. Was it 98% or did I exaggerate? It's some crazy.
Yeah, no, it's 98, 99%, right?
Yeah.
So that's just fascinating. And so the reason it fell, as I understand it, is that stock trading just absolutely collapsed because people didn't want if you trade a stock, it comes back to you in the notional prior currency. Nobody wanted it. Okay. So this is Gresham's law, I think, which is bad money drives out good, but in this case everybody wants the good money, nobody wants the bad money, which is the old stuff. Right. But that's the impact you might see with a gold-backed currency is like, wow, our stock market's doing really crunch,
Yeah. And didn't Germany do the same thing? It was actually against the law. It was a national pride during their the worst part of that, what World War II and everything else that was coming through there. And I'm second guessing myself on history right now. But you couldn't sell, right? If I understand correctly, if I remember correctly, you couldn't sell on a downtick. So after the war was over and reality came home, the market opened down 90% the next day. So you can keep this illusion up. So, Zimbabwe is showing that and Germany's showing the same thing. Now, Chris, in that article, did I read correctly that they're doing a gold-backed digital currency? Is that what they're trying to introduce, or is it just a traditional currency?
No, it's gonna have a digital aspect to it. Let me see if I can find that.
Okay, so it did have a part. That's what I just sped read the article real quick and set it aside with my weekend reading.
Yeah, this isn't the right article talking about that. Sorry, okay. I pulled up the wrong one. I thought I got the right one here. Yeah,
that's okay. There is a digital component to it, which is interesting because so many governments around the world are continuing to move in that direction. But a gold-backed, they've learned their lesson after walking away from gold, because Zimbabwe's just been blowing up inflationary holocaust after inflationary holocaust, and now they go back to the one honest monetary metal that's out there. And I guess they've decided to give up control and say, hey, let's just let it be linked to gold, do what's best for the people, because we're tired of the pain that we've been through, because the pain of changing is finally easier than the pain of staying the same.
Right, right. And speaking of governments going to that, Texas, Utah, and Tennessee have all passed at the state level laws that will allow them to use gold, silver again. How that gets implemented is interesting. So I've been talking with a guy who's part of that, and I've talked with a number of people involved in that. But they're basically going to a thing like, it'll be like a credit card that is tied back in, or a debit card at least that's tied back in, and there is a central repository. And Texas actually has a gold repository. So states are beginning to move back in that direction too. I actually think that we're going to see a lot of that going forward, just because it's just not okay for the Federal Reserve or any central bank to do what they do, Paul. I mean, they just make stuff up. They won't let us see what's going on in the books. We all suspect there's hanky-panky going on in there, right? Give us an audit. I just want to make sure that there aren't like trillions more outstanding that you've used to plug holes in the dike that we don't know about. I mean, we need to know. And so you got that. And then you had the FASB 56, where the government doesn't even have to tell us how much money they've spent, It's like, we don't, it's national security. Yeah. How embarrassing it would be if we found out where that money went is the security problem, usually. Right. So here's the thing. Money should never have trust be a component of it. You shouldn't have to trust it.
No. It should be verified and completely transparent. I mean,
and that's why a lot of people turn to Bitcoin, right? Because they say, well, no matter what happens, 21 million is the max number, and plus a few got lost in some landfills, quite tragically for the people whose computers got accidentally thrown away.
Yeah. What's that? The Big Bang Theory. They had a whole series on that. My wife loves The Big Bang Theory, and one of them had a computer that had their Bitcoin on it after they realized it was worth a lot. Yeah, that's happened.
Yeah. So, what were you gonna say there?
I got thinking about digital currency being away. So yeah, and it's interesting. Oh, that was one question I was going to put through. It came back to mind. I was going to ask you, have those states, are they counting gold and silver as currency so that you can exchange it without having to pay taxes on it? Or are they just linking it where you can be associated?
I don't know. I'm going to have to look that up.
I've been trying, I've not been able to get anywhere, but I've been begging our representatives here in the state of Georgia to recognize gold as a currency. So, as a valid currency, so that you don't have to pay taxes on exchanging it. I know it's more complicated than that, but there's precedent out there somewhere. So I was curious about that. That would be the ultimate if they were to count it as actual recognized currency in those states, and then you could exchange it for dollars without having to pay taxes on it.
Well, they should do that, right? Because nothing gets things sharpened up like competition. So if the Federal Reserve, hey, you guys and gals, do what you do, be non-transparent, print all this stuff up, gaslight us, lie about things, that's fine. But if we had a parallel currency and I could either choose to be paid in one or the other, you'd find out real quick that this would cause the Federal Reserve to have to shape up and fly right. Because again, for everybody listening, the Federal Reserve is about as federal as Federal Express. It's a private cartel. Their capital stock is owned by banks, and they nominally operate in the public best interest, but they won't allow themselves to be audited, and they're very secretive. And whoops, wouldn't you know it, when they print trillions of dollars up, we get these amazing wealth gaps that open up, right? And so that's a very easy process to understand and track. And so I think they need competition, because they've just been, how there's went back when I was, working in the business world, you would just have to take your consultants, if you're using them, you'd have to cycle them out every so often, keep them fresh, right? Because they get lazy and they start, being abusive to the relationship and taking it for granted. That's the Federal Reserve. Nobody's pressed them in a while, and they've gotten real lazy on stuff.
I had a debate with a client not too long ago, and that's what was coming to mind. They were like, oh, it's no big deal. The Federal Reserve is going to do what's in our best interest, kind of their government. Well, I did my best not to laugh for a few minutes. I was respectful as I could be. I said, okay, you got a 14-year-old grandson boy, right? I said, yeah. I said, so what would you do if you asked him what he was looking at on his phone, and you walked around the corner and you heard some odd sounds come out of it, and he's like, wouldn't give it to you? He said, I'd snatch that phone out of his hand, find out exactly what he's looking at. He's like, I care about what that child is looking at. I said, okay. So adults are just grown-up teenagers that learn to behave a little bit better. So why do you think it's okay to let the Federal Reserve not show you what's going on behind the scenes when we got all these questions? He says, okay, fair point. I get it. But, but people don't think of it like that. It's an institution, and they've taught to trust these institutions. And simply because there was a time in the past when those institutions earned our trust, but they earned our trust, right? They earned it by disclosing and communicating and sharing their wisdom and explaining the path and explaining the alternatives. Now it's do what I say because I'm smarter than you. And oh, by the way, don't look behind the curtain because you don't have any business looking there. It might disclose something that makes a bank or two look bad. So who cares? If a bank needs to look bad, they need to be, investors need to know that, right? So,
well, they tell me if I have nothing to hide, I shouldn't mind that we have warrantless FISA searches and somebody's scouring my private data all the time, and that's not actually, it's such a fallacious argument. If you have nothing to hide, privacy is still important in a relationship and in your own sense of self and all that, right? It still matters. But the Fed doesn't have an expectation or a right to said privacy because it's operating in a public capacity, right? So if you're operating in a public capacity, you should have the brightest of lights shined on you. Full on, yes. Right? So I was just talking with Nick the other day, who you know well, who works with me at Peak Prosperity, and he fell down a little rabbit hole where he's like, this is a little weird. So he's looking down the energy side of things and finding out, there's all these fabulous claims, like some guy made a car that runs on water. It's not quite what the claim makes, but you find out that there are lots and lots of patents out there that were granted for like different carburetors or things, right? And he said the shocking part that he wasn't aware of was how many of those had been made secret. So the government rides in, says that carburetor you've just invented there, Paul, we're putting a secret classification on it. Still your patent, but now you can't do anything with it, right? Because of its secret classification, right? What is that? That's government taking without compensation. As far as I'm concerned, that's an anti-constitutional thing. But leaving that aside, even spin that story for me. How is it in the national security to keep a carburetor secret? I'm like, hard to spin that one for me, but there they are. Right? It's like, because if that carburetor got out, oil sales would fall, and Exxon's doing some important stuff for us in a sensitive part of the world right now. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to come by.
Doesn't make sense at all. So in that case, they make it secretive so the person can't even sell it, right? Mm-hmm. So It's just like, hey, you came up with this great idea. No, thank you. It doesn't fit our narrative. So, too bad. Now you can't do anything with it, and you can't adapt if it's a secretive patent. Wow.
Yep. So it's just an odd thing, but that's what they've been doing. So I don't think any of that. I am such a libertarian when it comes to this stuff. Shine the bright light. If something truly, truly, truly is national security, and there could be a few narrow things that fit in there for me. But I think I heard on Tucker Carlson that like 1 billion documents a year out of the government are labeled secret. There's probably secret HUD programs and secret Department of Education stuff and everything's secret. Which is usually code speak for this is embarrassing stuff. We wouldn't want this to get out. Because you'd find out that my Aunt Edna is actually the main contractor for this HUD grant that just went out or whatever. It's like that. But the Fed, I think, needs to be audited. Full stop, top to bottom. And if they want to make some really complex argument about why we can't see something for a year or two, maybe.
Yeah.
But, if part of their argument, Paul, has always been, well, it could be really deleterious if somebody found out that, say, just making this up, Citibank was a major recipient of a discount window operation, and it was a temporary thing, and we wouldn't want people getting the wrong idea. Like, no, let people get the wrong idea. That's okay. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Or
Totally fine.
at a minimum, like you said, black out the name. Say, okay, there's a bank that had an issue. We'll disclose it 12 months from now because we've decided to give them a period to get here, but get through the issues, and then let the market go find it, right? Let those investors who are in these banks be scared to death and say, hey, I've got a large portion of my wealth in it. Let me go look at this. Okay, I see some things that I don't want. That can keep a bank run from happening, for example, but it doesn't matter how much you justify being able to obfuscate things and hold them in the dark. All it simply is an unwillingness to admit the truth and allow the truth to be out there. And the truth is by far the best path, right? I mean, that is by far the best path. And we try to justify it in our human nature. We all do it, have done it in the past. But just let the truth be out there and let the cards fall where they may, because that's what brings us together as a society. That's what puts us on a solid foundation. A house of cards is a house of lies, right? And so it just doesn't make sense. But I do believe that there's going to come a day when these things start to fall apart, that pendulum is going to swing back in the other direction. And that's the important part, that you've done such a good job as a watchman and preparing people, and how we try to manage, our job on this side to manage those funds. We can't pick the top. We're not going to pick the bottom, but to manage risk, to help protect people so that they can weather the storm and have resources on the other side to help rebuild society and their communities on the other side of it.
I get this. We've had a number of people really agonizing in the forums at Peak Prosperity, asking questions like, should I stay? Should I go? Should I move? I have this house. Should I sell it now? I have this other property. I can't quite swing the other property, which is out in the sticks compared to my primary house, which is in a city. But I want to be out in the sticks. I don't want to be in the city anymore. But if I go out there, is it too early? There's a lot of confusion out there right now about what to do. And I get it. It's tricky environment. How do you help people with those big decisions?
That's a tough one, Chris. I've had several conversations with a few individuals lately. Now, their strategy, okay? Like one individual's like, look, I'm ready to go, but I can't find a place to rent in that area. Current house is paid for. They have enough equity to be able to build something up there. And I'm like, okay, you can split the difference, use a line of credit against your current property to leverage against it to build that other one and pay cash for it, and then sell that other property. Well, if the poo hits the fan, right, and things absolutely come apart, well, you've got this property out here that's free and clear. You got this property that's not free and clear. So if you're going to lose one, you're better off to lose the one you're wanting to get out of. Not saying a strategy. This is just risk management planning. Mm-hmm. And then there's others that just aren't in a position to be able to do that. And I'm like, there's no easy decisions here. You're going to have to examine all the options. My step, and this is what I tell people, is to pray about it, to humbly ask for guidance and wisdom, and then have the courage to take that step of faith. Because I believe that, you know in your heart what the best path is to take. Now sometimes it takes courage to accept that. And I know in my situation, after a lot of time in prayer and thought and deliberation and seeking wise counsel, when I know something's right, even if it makes me nervous to take that step, it's always panned out to be the right step to take. The steps that have been wrong are those that the only reason I didn't take it was because of the fear of failure. And, and the question is if you're going to fail, would you rather fail in the place that you want to be when you look at the big picture for your family, or do you want to fail in the place that you don't want to be? Right. And, and the reality is conversation I have with people, I can't give them that. I can't make that decision for them. I can just try to help them step through the thought process. But the reality is, if what we're all concerned about comes to play, right, the weak men that have been in charge bring about hard times, there's going to come a day where it's too late, and the pain of moving is going to be a lot greater than what the pain of moving now is going to be. The good thing is house prices are high, but they're high, in other areas, and in some areas they're still lower, even though they're dramatically higher. Now I've heard Florida and some of the other states in California prices are starting to come down a little bit, where it doesn't quite make as much sense. But as long as it's working out, you can make that lateral move. Or if you're in a position where you can sell here and then you can move and rent, that's kind of my favorite strategy right now. Is that way you can wait out the market and see what these higher interest rates do to real estate over the next 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, let me I thought I was going to pull it up here.
Long-winded answer while you're looking at that, but I can think of like 12 different conversations that I've had, and I'm trying to, cover them all in one little broad
I mean,
brush.
it's complicated. So I appreciate it. A lot of moving pieces, obviously, and it's very hard to get the timing right. And, we all want to try and get the timing right. Eventually, you just have to say, look, my time is more valuable than money, right? Yeah. And so let me make the most of the time that's out there. So as somebody who because of my divorce, I had this whole, really tricked out homestead, and it was functioning. And so lost that in the process. And so I started over essentially here in this property in Chester, and we're 4 years into it. And boy, I'm working as fast as I can, Paul. We're building up the soil. And I think this year, the first year, our plum trees are like this big around at the base, and they're just coated with flowers. So I think we're going to get a really big harvest this year, because last year we had a killer frost at the wrong time, hit the buds, no peaches, no plums. But this year, I guess they stored up all that energy, and there's like, woo, I think I still need 3 more years. I think it takes, for me, 7 years to get a homestead to where I want it to be. I think that would be my minimum time. Even if you said, we're going to drop you into a new area and you know how to do it, unless I had like just ungodly amounts of money to throw at it, even with that, it still takes time, just takes time. And that's more valuable to me than the money at this stage.
Yes. Yes. And the bottom line is as long as somebody's not putting themselves in a foolish financial position to make that move, you're talking about, and you got to know your long-term situation. That's why we run those retirement plans, to let people know. And I've had several people that once they look at that, we're like, okay, you've got some extra funds that are freed up here that, it's good to have as a cushion, but you can dedicate this towards making that move. I wouldn't recommend somebody, go out and leverage themselves to the hilt and expect that we're going to have inflation take care of it. I certainly wouldn't go buy something to leverage myself to the hilt with the expectation that, rates are going to go back to 2 or 3% again. If they do, that's a lottery ticket opportunity. But with the policies that are in place right now, it's highly unlikely. But like you said, if you're talking about spending a little extra money to move over sooner rather than later, and I was thinking about your soil, because when I was up at the Honey Badger event, I paid very close attention to it, because we're red clay here in North Georgia, and where we moved from, I had unbelievable soil because it's something that I had been working on for 15 years. And you're right. I think it's about 7 years. My soil's far better because I planted some of the garden yesterday. I'm doing another one first weekend in May. But my soil looks so much better, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be. It just takes time to do that. Cover crops and green manure. And you only get the winter time to be able to put cover crops in and the springtime to put green manure down and blend those in. So it just takes time to compost.
It sure does. It sure does. And speaking of, I was just reading a really horrifying report about how all these insurance companies down in Florida went out of business, and they just apparently getting house insurance is becoming a real problem down there in Florida. So that could be a driver. But this, speaking of drivers, under the Biden proposal, the combined federal state capital gains tax is going to be 59% in California. 59%. 59%. 59. If the Biden proposal comes through. But New Jersey, Oregon, Minnesota, and New York rounding out the top 5. If only there was some sort of a political pattern we could notice about those states. Oh well.
Well, that tells you what's going to happen if we get a blue wave. At least they're telling us ahead of time. My goodness.
Well, it's communism but we're going to call it capitalism. Oh no, those are just taxes, citizen. But it's like, wait a minute, everything I own belongs to the state. I'm pretty sure that's communism. You know,
Yeah. Yeah,
the
it is.
the vast bulk of my effort is dedicated to the state. I'm pretty sure that's not capitalism. You know?
No, it's not capitalism. It's go to work for me and I'll take from thee. So,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
fortunately,
But yeah, I struggle with those questions too when people ask, what should I do? Because I don't, there's no right answer necessarily. And I don't want to be responsible for somebody making a big wrong decision in
yeah.
life, so they're very personal and of course they're very complicated, right? Each situation is very unique, right? How old are your kids? What's your personal economic situation? Where are you moving from and to? You got elderly parents. Where are your friends? There's a lot of factors that come into that for people, So
Yeah.
I think that's why. So if I could, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. People call me a futurist, Paul, but I'm a trend extrapolator. I'm just like, look, if the hammer's falling towards the ground, my prediction is it's going to go
It's
towards the
gonna be
ground,
correct.
you
Yeah.
know? So I have a prediction based on, the fiscal trajectory of the United States. It's not good. I don't like where it's going, but someday people are going to say, how did you know? Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't that hard, honestly. So what we're doing this year, you've been to a couple, you mentioned the Honey Badger event. This year we're having the Peak Prosperity Summit. It's our in-person gathering. It's going to be in New Hampshire this year, September 13th through the 15th. And if anybody wants to come to that, you can find tickets for that at Peak Prosperity. But what I'm doing, Paul, is meet and greet on Friday. Saturday morning, I'm opening up with it's a Bayesian scenario experiment. Okay, fancy term for we put up some scenarios and we use the wisdom of the crowd to sort of figure out right now what's most likely. Because you have your point of view, I have mine. Everybody has theirs. You'll have some extreme outliers both directions, but there'll be a little peak, right?
Hmm.
And then at a minimum, you can say, okay, this is what the crowd collectively thinks, right? Is something gonna break? If so, what in 2026, 27, 28, 29, 30, whatever. And that's based on, I don't know if you know this, but they lost a nuclear sub back in the 60s, I think, the Scorpion. It where'd it go, right? And so they had all these experts and they were all yelling at each other, and some were certain based on ocean currents and last known trajectory that it must be here, and others thought it would be there. And so they put everybody in a room and they ran one of these, it's called a Bayesian experiment, where you take the dispersion of all the possible guesses people had, and then they put that on a map and they looked there and they found it. Like it was right there,
Wow.
And so I believe in the collective wisdom of the crowds
I
more
do
than I
too.
believe in my own wisdom. And that sets me apart from the communists because they believe that,
Hmm.
the state has all the right answers. I don't. So this is going to be an interesting exercise. I'm really looking forward to getting everybody in a room, all 400 of us and getting that timeline and getting that probability scenario grid out and having people stand on that and mapping it out. Because then we'll have all the conversations. You can go, all right, I'm on this side of the curve. Why is that nut on the opposite side of the curve? Either way, right? Or you find people who are over on your side and you say, how come you see it this way and what are you doing? And
Yeah.
I think it's going to be great for getting everything kicked off.
I'm excited about that. I'm looking forward to the event this year. I just met some incredible people and incredible conversations, and it was just refreshing to spend a weekend with people that care that deeply about their families, the future, and discovering wisdom. That's exciting, Chris. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, we've had people come in the past years from Yellowknife, Canada. We've had
Hmm.
people that last year we had people from Lithuania and Australia. So it's a pretty interesting
Hmm.
crowd.
That
It is.
was that is
Yeah.
neat.
It's
Neat
always my favorite
perspective
part.
in conversation. So, and the place is
Yeah.
nice. I looked at the place that the event's going to be hosted at. That's a nice place.
Well, it is. We'll have decent facilities this year and a place to be inside and, better meeting rooms or venues and things like that. But I just hope it's just one of those crisp fall leaves just turning kind of a weekends that you get, with a bright blue sky. If it's that weekend, it's just magic up there anyway, that time of year.
Mhm.
Really beautiful. So, well, with that, what else do you have? Anything else burning up your mind today?
That's it for today. We've covered a lot, but in closing, the one thing I will say is seriously, anybody out there, consider the tax consequences in the future. And we're at 40-year low tax brackets, and some of these proposals are telling us that they want them to go higher. So don't miss that opportunity to seriously look at the advantages of a Roth conversion. That's about the only thing I could wrap up with today.
All right. Well, very good. So if anybody wants to talk to Paul and his incredible team, just go to peakfinancialinvesting.com, fill out a very simple form. Emails get sent. You'll get contacted, notified. It's been working really well. And Paul's team has been busy talking with people like you who know that it's time to start planning. And risk managed strategy is a really I'm so glad that people can take advantage of your services, Paul. You've been doing great work with them. Great feedback so far. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Really appreciate it.
It's our honor. I love my job, and I love it even more now, being able to help so many people and hopefully make a difference in their lives for the better. If we can all do that, everything else will take care of itself.
Fantastic. Well, all right. Well, thanks very much for your time again today. We'll do this again next week. Until then, signing off. Good to see you, Paul.
Good to see you too, Chris.
Hello, Chris Martinson. I'm the CEO of Peak Prosperity and also Peak Financial Investing. And after watching that, you're probably wondering, well, what do I do with my money? Look, you both deserve and need somebody who can talk to you about what's really going on in this world, understand the situation as it is, not be steering you towards certain things that don't make sense for you or just keep you in a game that's already ended. Look, if you want to talk to somebody about the petrodollar declining or what is happening with gold or which sectors are actually the best ones to be in, given what the Federal Reserve is up to or the federal government, you deserve to talk to somebody who can answer those and has a few gray hairs and has been there through some of the economic cycles because, hey, we're in another economic cycle, so it's good to have that experience. Fortunately, at Peak Financial Investing, what we do is we go out and we scour and we look for the very best firms out there who satisfy one thing above all else. They've got great experience coupled to great customer service. So if you want to come by peakfinancialinvesting.com, there's a very simple form you can fill out, just a few fields. You hit send. What happens is an email gets triggered out. It goes to an endorsed firm of ours. You will get an email back. You can then set up a phone call for a 30 to 45 minute free, no obligation, no pressure call to find out if this firm is a good fit for you and to find out if you're a good fit for the firm. It has to go both ways. And if all that matches up, this will be one of the best things that could happen to you this year. So please come by peakfinancialinvesting.com. Very simple process. We would love to help you if we can. Thanks very much.